Make sure you add Masti to your lives. Download the app today and stay energized and connected on the go. Radio Masti 24/7 Live, Singapore's only Bollywood radio since 2009. Oh yeah.
A very warm welcome, and of course, this is Radio Masti 24/7 and an exclusive conversation, as you know, that we bring to you every day, and of course on Masti AVI. Why is today's conversation very, very exclusive? Well, I have to tell you, there are many, many reasons. We all have been talking about COVID-19. Yes, a tag which was unknown to most of us till 2020. A name that was announced by the World Health Organization as the official name for a disease that was caused in 2019, novel coronavirus outbreak, COVID, where CO stands for corona, VI for virus, and D for disease. A chapter that we will remain witness definitely to the generations. And of course, when the continued generations come in and they will talk about what happened this year, what happened in 2020, suddenly the mask, which for us existed only for the superheroes and also for bank robberies at one stage, suddenly became a time when each one of us had to be masked. And that itself says a lot about what we have been facing as a generation. And of course, as a community, not only where we are, but across the world. On a very serious note, welcome to a very exclusive conversation. This is Radio Masti 24/7 and Masti AVI. And today, I'm extremely, extremely proud to be presenting on our niche visual platform a very exclusive and special guest, somebody who we've heard talk, we've seen him share a lot of information and knowledge and experience with a lot of audience. But today we thought, let's just get him on our platform and make him talk to each one of us about what exactly is going on around the world. This is Professor Paul Anantaraja Tambyah, a Singaporean doctor and professor of infectious diseases. He has led Singapore Society of Infectious Diseases for 4 years and is one of the committee members of the Action for AIDS Singapore. He also became the Assistant Dean at the National University of Singapore's Faculty of Medicine in 2015, and in June 2020, he became the President-elect of the International Society of Infectious Diseases, and is now set to be the first Singaporean to hold the position, which is expected to start with his term in 2020. That says a lot about somebody that I would like to invite on this platform right now.
Make sure you add Masti to your lives. Download the app today and stay energized and connected on the go. Radio Masti 24/7 Live, Singapore's only Bollywood radio since 2009. Oh yeah.
Welcome, Professor. It's a privilege to have you here with us on Radio Masti 24/7 and Masti AVI.
Hi, thanks a lot for that kind introduction. I just want to clarify, I started my presidency in 2022, but otherwise, thanks again.
Yeah, and we're just looking forward to that. Of course, being the first Singaporean to be taking over that position, it's a matter of huge prestige, not only for you personally, but also for the whole country. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Professor, I know it's been overwhelming, to say the least, the last year for you as an individual, as a professional. There's been so much happening suddenly. You know, infectious diseases is something, and that too a pandemic, is something that only comes in many years. And unfortunately, we as a generation have been witness to it already. So could you share a little bit about your experience, how it all started, how you really first, at a personal level got aware of this being a pandemic, and then, of course, how you used your experience and knowledge to educate others about what exactly should be the way forward?
Well, interestingly enough, the first I heard about this was on New Year's Eve in 2020, end of 2019, when a friend of mine who works in Hong Kong, he sent me screenshots of messages that had been going around on Chinese social media to say that people had tested positive for SARS in the city of Wuhan. So I immediately sent that over to colleagues in Hong Kong to try and infectious disease experts who I knew through various professional societies to ask them whether it was true, whether they knew what kind of tests were being done. And true enough, by the end of the day, the Chinese actually publicly announced that there was an outbreak in Wuhan. And I still remember, talking to colleagues, getting ready at the university, thinking about what we were going to do. And we were pretty sure it would come to Singapore. In fact, because Singapore has very close ties with China, there are a lot of tourists, there are people from China who are working in Singapore. And so we thought it was a matter of time. So we had colleagues in the Ministry of Health who were preparing on the operational side. But on the university side, it was amazing. We got a research grant that came in from the university itself. And in fact, it was a businessman who had a business based in Wuhan. And he felt so concerned that he made a significant donation to the university to help us to try and study how this virus was transmitted. So, and then, it just spread really rapidly. And it's just been a whirlwind this last 12 months.
Certainly has. So does this virus remind you of anything that you've read about in the past? Something, because we've been talking about the Spanish flu, we've been talking, of course, amongst the common public mainly about that as a pandemic, which is comparable. But is there something that comes to your mind as an expert?
Well, I came back to Singapore in 1999, and then 4 years later we had the SARS outbreak. And that was pretty devastating. And actually, what was more devastating than the virus itself was the travel restrictions, because countries put travel restrictions on Taiwan, on Singapore, on Hong Kong, and on Canada. And the Canadians in particular were very unhappy about that. And so, in fact, when the 2009 H1N1 pandemic occurred, the WHO made it a point that there should not be any travel restrictions. Like to Mexico, which is where the virus first appeared, and then later on to the United States. Right. But this virus has been different. I mean, global travel has shut down. I know so many people who've got friends and families who haven't seen each other for months, which is really, really tragic.
It is. It certainly is. So, Professor, if I may just ask you a few questions that we've gathered from our audience, and otherwise, of course, there's top of mind. Everybody's been talking about COVID-19. There's no other topic in the news. There's no other topic when we talk to anybody far and wide, friends and relatives across the globe. So I guess it makes you a very special guest on the show today, and definitely the questions are going to be repetitive for you, but definitely very, very important for each one of us. So thank you so much for your patience. My first question to you, Professor, would be that Singapore has actually approved the Pfizer BioNTech and more recently the Moderna vaccines, right? So for the population in Singapore, the question that comes is, how are these really evaluated? What are the criteria that, as a government, as the experts, what exactly do you look at while deciding one vaccine over the others?
Yeah, so the Health Sciences Authority in Singapore, they are the regulators, and they are pretty stringent in terms of the drugs and the vaccines which they allow into Singapore. They do have reference agencies, and the three reference agencies that they use are the US FDA, the European Medicines Agency, and the Australian Therapeutic Goods Administration. But in addition, they will look at the primary data. So, there's a lot of talk about how this Pfizer-BioNTech, all these vaccines came out after just 1 year. But in actual fact, a lot of the preliminary work was done with SARS. SARS occurred in 2003. And there was a lot of work on developing SARS vaccines. They identified the spike protein as the major target for the immune system. And around 2004 and 2005, there were actually prototype vaccines for SARS that were developed. And they were actually given to animals, to what we call non-human primates or monkeys. So they gave them the vaccine, they challenged them with the SARS virus, and then they saw that they were actually protected. But the thing is that in 2005, 2006, there was no more SARS. So there was no money to develop these vaccines any further. And that, unfortunately, is the reality of the modern pharmaceutical industry. So these vaccines died, or they were just put into cold storage. And what happened when COVID appeared in 2019, 2020? A lot of the same scientists are still around. Many of them are still active. So they just
Right.
pulled this stuff out of the freezer and they started working on it and they started modifying it and they started seeing how it could be done safely. The regulatory pathway is actually provisional. So, Singapore has approved these two vaccines, but they're both provisional approvals. In other words, you can't go to your general practitioner and say, I want a shot of the Pfizer vaccine, or I want a
Right.
shot of the Moderna vaccine. These have to be given in controlled situations, and right now they're being given by the Ministry of Health, by the public healthcare institutions, and by approved providers to like people at the airport or in the harbor.
Right.
So they're not fully licensed. Like I said, you can't just walk up to a doctor and ask for the vaccine. So it is a kind of staged process, and they look at the data, they look at what other countries are doing, and that's kind of how it happens. The US FDA has an amazingly transparent process. In fact, you can go online and you can read the transcript of the meeting at which the vaccine was approved, and you could actually listen to a live stream of that meeting. And it's really interesting because you can see there were some people there at the meeting who asked some very difficult questions. One of them was the fact that there's less than 10 monkeys who've been vaccinated with this
Exactly. Yeah.
vaccine. So, and interestingly enough, none of the monkeys who were subsequently infected with COVID actually got pneumonia. So even those who got placebo, when they gave them the virus, none of them got pneumonia. So the conclusion was that monkeys may not get as sick from COVID-19 as humans do. But what they did was they did CT scans of the monkeys, and they found that even though they didn't have symptoms of pneumonia, they had evidence of pneumonia on the scan. And then unfortunately, they had to sacrifice the animals. And when they did, they found that the vaccine protected and those animals which were vaccinated didn't have virus inside the lungs, whereas those animals which were given placebo had virus. And so that allowed them to go on to the human studies. So they did the phase 1 and phase 2 studies, and then they did the very highly publicized phase 3 study with more than 30,000 subjects, and that's when they showed 95% efficacy. So it's a process. It takes some time. And the Singapore authorities, they look at the primary data, but they also look at what other people find.
Right. I think that's a very important insight that you've shared with us, because obviously a very big question is why not this and why not that, right? Everybody has their own thoughts behind why only the Pfizer BioNTech and why Moderna and not the other ones. And then, of course, we get data from the other parts of the world where we know that some of the vaccines are leading to fatalities, and that brings another question. That if that can happen, it can happen here as well. So how was the testing done, and how in depth was the overall research? But thank you so much for sharing that, Professor. My other question, of course, is a very common question. I'm sure you've faced it many times, is who should not consider getting a vaccine? So if a person has allergies or something, anything you'd like to highlight, or a certain age group, please do share with us.
Yeah, so right now, based on the early data, and most data has actually come out of the United States, these vaccines do apparently have a higher rate of allergies than, say, the flu vaccine. So the initial analysis for the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine was that it was 10 per million individuals who would develop severe allergic reactions. Now, if you're a glass is half empty person versus a glass is half full person, 10 per million is not a lot. That means that 999,990 people had no reaction. But 10 is actually quite a lot when you compare it with, say, the flu vaccine, where the rate was only 1.5. Yep. So, it's 990,990 versus 990,999. But again, when I tell my patients that, they say, what if I'm that one? And that is true. So it's fair enough. So what we're trying to understand is who are the people who are at highest risk for these severe allergic reactions. And we've seen this in Singapore as well. You've probably heard the Singapore Ministry of Health has announced that there were 4 individuals with severe allergic reactions to the vaccine.
Yes.
What is interesting is the data that has been published from the United States shows that 90%, close to 90% of the individuals who had the severe allergic reactions were people who had other allergies. So like they were allergic to nuts, they were allergic to seafood, or they were allergic to aspirin or some other medication or penicillin, and then they went on to get allergies to this vaccine. So I think the bottom line is, if you've had a severe allergy to something, to anything, then you should be careful. And I'm going to tell you this from my own personal point of view. My mom can't take shellfish.
Mm.
There's this dish called Hokkien mee in Singapore,
Yes.
which is made with prawns,
Yeah.
and the broth has got clams in it. So we went to a place, we ordered it. I told them no clams, no squid, but the broth still had clams. And after eating a couple of spoons, the lips started swelling up. So and that's the kind of situation that you really want to be careful about. So I think if you've had a serious allergy, you probably want to wait for a different vaccine from either the Pfizer or the Moderna vaccines.
Understand. So let's at this point, maybe I would just like to quickly take a question here. How safe is it for a person with bronchitis, asthma, allergies to be vaccinated? And does the health history or other criteria determine which vaccine is more suitable for a person?
Yeah, right now, bronchitis, asthma, and just skin allergies, these are not considered high risk. So in the hospital in Singapore, they've vaccinated lots of people with asthma and skin allergies, and they've had no trouble so far, as far as we know. So I think you can go ahead with the vaccines that are currently licensed in Singapore.
Okay, that really helps. The other part of the question, of course, whether the health history or other criteria determines. So, as far as the two brands or the two vaccines are concerned, the approved ones for Singapore, right? So, is there any criteria in terms of who should be given which one, or it doesn't quite matter?
Yeah, at this point in time, it doesn't quite matter because when the US CDC reanalyzed their data,
Right.
where they found when it was given to more people, and I think what happened was they started filtering out those with severe allergic reactions. The rate of allergic reactions for Pfizer dropped to 5 per million, and for Moderna it was 2.5. So they're quite close, and the thing is, they're still a little bit higher than flu, which is 1. So I think, and apart from that, nothing else has emerged as a major sort of risk factor. But again, there's a lot of close monitoring that's going on. In fact, the US CDC has this vaccine adverse events thing, which you can actually, anyone can access it, and you can find out. You just have to register with an email address.
Okay, understand. That's important. So just few other questions. Maybe I can ask you about this one, which says that we understand that a vaccine may have a reaction. So once it does have a reaction, which could be of any kind, what happens to the second dose? So one doesn't go for the second dose in that case? What would be?
Yeah, again, the best thing to do is actually to talk to your physician or the person who's giving you the vaccine. If you've had a severe allergic reaction to the first dose, in general, the recommendation is that you don't. So of the 4 people in Singapore who had the severe allergic reaction, I think the current recommendation is that they should not get the vaccine. For if you have had just a mild reaction, unfortunately, you've got to be prepared for another mild reaction. So I'll give you an example. I had my first dose on the 18th of January, and I had a painful arm. It hurt around the site of the injection, and it hurt down the arm for about 3 hours. So yesterday I went for my second dose, and the nurse was very helpful. She said, if you had that with the first dose, it's going to be worse with the second dose. So just take a Panadol ahead of time. I don't like taking drugs, so I just prepared to have a pretty relaxed afternoon. And true enough, it did hurt for about 4 or 5 hours in the arm, but I'm fine today.
Okay, perfect. So that is good to know because, if it is a mild reaction, of course, one understands because it happens not only with this vaccine, I believe with a lot of vaccines that you take in the, while you're growing up, of course, you have different ones that you're taking. So it does happen. Sometimes you get fever, sometimes you get pain here and there, and sometimes you're, not so energetic any longer. So thanks so much for sharing that. So just one question here that a lot of people are asking is, can someone who is vaccinated get infected? Does that happen?
Yeah. So this actually happened in Singapore. There was an engineer who was vaccinated on the 27th of January, and then he turned out to have symptoms on the 4th of February. And part of the thing is it takes about 2 weeks for the vaccine to work. And, with one dose of vaccine, the data suggests that you're only 50-60% protected.
Yeah.
So you need to get your second dose. So unfortunately for this guy, he was vaccinated a bit too late. He was somebody who was relatively high risk because he was a close contact of somebody who came from Japan who was infected on a ship. And in Singapore, we have very few local cases, but we have lots of imported cases. So people working at the airport, people working at the harbor who have to go on board ships. These individuals are relatively high risk. So,
Yes.
so that's why the vaccine is being rolled out to them early. But unfortunately for this guy, it was not early enough. So you can get infected. And even in the large 30,000 person clinical trials, there were a small number of individuals who got infected despite having the vaccine. The good news is, though, that none of them had severe infection.
Okay.
And we know this happens with other vaccines, like, for example, the chickenpox vaccine.
Right.
The chickenpox vaccine has been highly effective. You hardly hear of kids getting chickenpox nowadays because everybody gets vaccinated. But if
Yes.
you do get someone, a teenager with chickenpox, it tends to be relatively mild. They have a few spots here and there
Right.
after the vaccination. They don't get severely ill like
Right.
people do.
So by the sound of what you're saying, it feels that you believe that we should get vaccinated. As far as I mean, I'm not saying that we are trying to change the opinion of people or the personal preferences. All I'm saying is that by the sound of it, because you've got it, that's one. Of course, being in the healthcare. The other bit is that we've also talked about immunity that builds up, and if people do tend to get infected later, the infection may not be as bad as it might be if you are not vaccinated. Is that something that we would
Yes,
look
that's
at?
right, and I like the fact that you pointed out we're not trying to change anybody's mind,
No.
and this is one thing the WHO has done is they said the vaccine should not be mandatory.
Yes.
That people should want to do it, and you shouldn't try and force somebody to get vaccinated because that's going to be counterproductive. See, once you make something mandatory, people just try and avoid doing it, or they get suspicious, they trust you, and things like that. But part of the reason why I got it is because I'm a healthcare worker. The other reason is I like to travel, and I think that it's a matter of time before this is going to be a requirement for travel. If suddenly they open up the borders and they say, "Oh, you got to wait 6 weeks after your second dose of vaccine," then God,
I have a
now
lot of
I kind of
questions.
created it. Yeah.
I have a lot of questions on travel. How long before the
Yeah.
vaccine drive is completed, and of course travels start again. So, is travel and vaccine related? What is your view?
Oh, I think it's hugely related. In fact, we wrote an editorial in the journal that's published by the International Society for Infectious Diseases, where we suggested that this is not rocket science. It's not something new because if you travel to South America or to Central Africa, you need to have a yellow fever vaccination. It's required
Yes.
by the international
Yes.
health regulations. And
Yes.
there's this yellow book or yellow card where you have to have a documentation that you had the yellow fever vaccine. Otherwise, you can't go in. Or if you come from Africa and you try and come into Singapore without the documentation, they won't let you in. See? So it's something which has happened before, and more commonly than that, for people who go to Saudi Arabia for the Umrah or the Hajj, they
Yeah.
have to have the meningitis vaccine. So this is something which people have accepted for years and years. So I think it's just a matter of time before they just add the COVID vaccine to the list.
Exactly. So there's no need to be so scared. There's no need to be so worried about, it's just, I mean, if we really look at it, it's just one more vaccine which has been added because we have seen something very new in terms of the virus that we recently experienced, right? So we've not seen that before, and therefore this vaccine didn't exist. But now, just like any other vaccine, that comes and goes, right? But it's your choice whether to get it or not to get it. But then be ready for the aftermath, right? You may be
Yes,
infected
that's right. And I think, again, this is the point, see, that we're not trying to make it mandatory. And I strongly feel that it should not be mandatory. But,
Right.
the reality is that once the vaccine has been shown to work, people will line up
Right.
for it. That's
Yes.
what happened with the polio vaccine in the 1950s when people saw that the kids who were vaccinated were not getting polio, they just lined up and tried to get their kids vaccinated to prevent them from getting sick.
Exactly. I guess it's a matter of wait and watch approach
That's right.
that people want to take just to be cautious because obviously the news about people having reactions to the vaccine travels much faster than the percentage of people who are not getting it, the negative reaction. So, just a question to the vaccine again, Professor. When we talk about the vaccine, is this a regular feature now going forward, or is it going to be a one time? Is there some kind of research we have on that yet?
Yeah, this is the $64 million question. And I was actually a part of a group which was led
I
by
don't
a
mind
professor.
the cash though.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a group from Duke NUS, together with some from NUS and some from NCID. And what we did was early on in the outbreak, we had people who got SARS 17 years ago. And a lot of the people who got SARS were doctors and nurses. So these people were very conscientious, and they called us up and they said, "Hey,
Yeah.
there's this new virus going around. Do you want some of my blood?" And that was very kind of them. But they actually donated some of their blood. And we saw that the SARS virus is actually very close to this virus, and that the T cells in their blood neutralize the COVID virus
Oh,
17 years later. So there is some hope that people who are vaccinated or who had natural infection with COVID-19, there's a good chance. I think it's greater than 50% that they may have immunity 17 years later. And if that really happens, that would be great.
and when do you think we would get to know that? Because obviously,
It takes 17 years to know that, but I think within the next year or so, we will
yeah,
get to some indication.
yeah,
There's been very close monitoring for reinfection. Singapore has just reported the first reinfection, and this was in one of the workers. But that's out of 50,000 workers, we've had one reinfection, and so we need to. So again, there are people who get chickenpox a second time, but
exactly.
it's very rare. It's very rare.
Yeah, yeah. No, definitely a relapse is said to be worse than the first time most of the times. But obviously we cannot compare the dorm workers situation because he was not inoculated so
No,
far.
he wasn't, but he had natural infection in April. So,
Okay.
so all the others who had natural infection in April, nobody else got it, even though he had it. Yeah, and there are like 10 to 15 people in a room.
Yeah.
So I think there is some degree of protection, but certain individuals, for some reason, they get it a second time. It
Right.
does happen.
Wow. So obviously, if by next year we see that people who are already vaccinated are coming back with infections, then the question that comes up is should they be vaccinated again with the same that they got last year, or it can be any other vaccine? I mean, there's
No,
so much of
yeah.
complexity.
So this is the influenza scenario.
Yeah.
If you get vaccinated against the flu this year, the chances are you will not be protected next year because there's a different strain of flu going around. So there are some people who think that the COVID is going to behave like influenza and that every year you're going to get a COVID jab just like you get your flu jab.
Right.
I don't think so. See, I'm in the other camp, and I think that it's going to be more like measles or mumps. See, if you get a shot, it's going to protect you in the long term, but
Hmm.
only time will tell who's right.
Right. Because I was just going to ask you, Professor, what makes you think so? But
Yeah. So what makes me think so? There are a couple of things which make me think that. Number one is our study of people with SARS. 17
okay.
years later, having some degree of immunity. The other is this interesting phenomenon that children don't get COVID that badly. Most of the people who have had severe COVID have been the elderly. And that occurs when there's some degree, so there's some theory going around that the children, they get colds all the time. So they're exposed to other coronaviruses. So maybe they have some kind of protective immunity which
Right.
lasts until they become teenagers. And then when they become older, they lose that immunity. So
Right.
that's one of the theories, but it's a huge area of research that people are really looking into.
Wow. All right. Another question. Now, that is a very practical question. Senior citizens are prioritized for inoculation, as we know, and that's a global phenomena. What if they get infected because of their helper, who's in the same household as them? Isn't it important for the helper to be prioritized too?
Yes, and actually, I would tend to agree with that. And I think, the minister was asked this question in Parliament about the
Hmm.
migrant workers, and he did say that there was a plan to move them up. It's just that the logistics are extremely challenging.
Hmm.
Frankly, for domestic workers who are looking after elderly people, it's not that difficult.
Hmm.
Because very often they are the ones who accompany the older person for medical checkup.
Yes.
So, and the work permit is registered to the address of the senior.
Yeah.
So I think it's not too difficult. It's just a matter of trying to work out, how they make sure they capture everybody. And Singapore is very sophisticated IT systems and stuff like that. So I think it's a matter of time. But that's a good suggestion, and it's highly likely that it's in the works.
Right. That really helps a lot. Another question that everyone's thinking about is, what if you get infected between the doses? What really happens in that case?
Yeah, so that's like the engineer guy, the guy who was working on the ship. So he unfortunately got infected after his first dose, before the second dose. And at the moment, we don't have enough information, but data from the clinical trials does suggest that, the first dose provides you with some protection. So the chances are he's not going to get really sick. So like I said,
Right.
you make a milder form of the disease.
Right, right. Is there something that you can advise to people who are still debating in their mind about whether to go for the vaccine or not? Of course,
Yeah.
being totally neutral, can you
Yeah.
suggest
So
what should be the
what
course
I
of-
have generally told people is that you need to do a risk assessment for yourself. See, if you're working in Changi Airport, if you are working in the harbor, if you're going to come in contact, if you're in the police or security services, and you're going to come in contact with a lot of people who are traveling from high risk areas, even in this day and age,
Yes.
then, I think you need to be prepared. Even if you have some mild allergies, just, this is not medically recommended, but I've got doctor friends who pop an antihistamine before they go for the injection, just so that they don't get a mild allergic reaction to the drug, because they say that their practices involve a lot of people who are coming in and out of the country. But on the other hand, if you are low risk, if you're an older person, you stay at home, watch TV all day, and you don't have a domestic worker, the person looking after you is somebody who's also largely stays at home and just goes to the office, works from home or something like that, then the risk is low. And I would say, if you're not sure, just wait.
Yeah.
The only downside is that the Singapore government, is being pragmatic as ever, and they've said right now the vaccine is free. If you wait until everybody else has been vaccinated, you got to pay for it. So that's likely to be the case. And I've told a few friends that too. If you wait until everybody has been vaccinated, there's no way you're going to get it for free. You're going to pay for it. And the flu vaccine is what, $30-$40 in the GP, and the price of the Pfizer vaccine in the US, I think it's about $27 to $30 US. So it's not cheap, but it's not too expensive either.
So take your call, depending on what your
You either get it free now, or you wait for it. You got to pay for it.
Yeah, well, I doubt that people are thinking about the $30-$40. I think the bigger question is, all the negative news that sort of flows in much faster, as I mentioned. So they are all worried, and also at the same time, I think the travel is a big criteria. What people believe is that for some reason they've got more confidence in Pfizer as compared to any other, and therefore people are kind of writing to the MOH and pushing to get inoculated now if they are into that, rather than wait for the Moderna later. So do you think that there is any reason for them to be worried that this one is better than the other?
Yeah, I mean, objectively speaking, the two vaccines are very similar in terms of the outcomes, in terms of the clinical trial data. I think Pfizer kind of shot themselves in the foot when they withdrew their registration for India. And part of the reason is it's a purely financial calculation, because the Indian regulators wanted them to do a bridging study. So Singapore has required bridging studies for other drugs, but not for these vaccines. So a bridging study means that you take the results of a study done overseas and you do a small sample of that study in the country. So to do a study is very expensive. You've got to set up the testing, you've got to set up the very rigorous monitoring, you've got to find the volunteers, and Pfizer decided it was just not worth their while. India's already vaccinated 4 million people. So the market is shrinking as over the time. So if they put in all the money, they did a bridging study. By that time, half the population is already vaccinated. So they did their calculations. Again, I'm speculating, but this is what seems to be the rationale behind them withdrawing the application from India. And so when they did that, of course, the conspiracy theorists turn around and say, "Oh, it's dangerous. That's why they withdrew it." See, but frankly, having worked with pharma industry for many years, I can tell you all they care about is dollars and cents. I mean, they care about obviously the good for the mankind, but ultimately it's dollars and cents which are the bottom line.
The best stocks for people to have already invested in earlier. and of course last year as well. I'm sure a lot of them did already. Just
Right.
before I let you go, Professor, I know you have a lot of commitments. You have a very busy schedule, but I just want to grab a few more moments from your
Yeah.
schedule. One, I do want to ask you. What's really happening here is that people are still talking about COVID-19 as a disease, which as a part of the pandemic, of course, which is going to stay. What is your personal view? Is it going to be a part of our lives going forward? Are we never going to go back to the times when the masks did not exist or things did not seem to be the way they are today? And how do you want us to be prepared?
Yeah, I think COVID-19 is going to eventually evolve to be something similar to the common cold. And that happens with a lot of these viruses because it's not in the interest of a virus to kill its host. And the
Yeah.
virus, over a period of time, it adapts to the host and it becomes very widespread. What I
Right.
am worried about, though, is the fact that influenza has disappeared. The last case of influenza detected by Ministry of Health surveillance was in May, and that's several months ago. And worldwide, if you go to the WHO website and you look at the influenza surveillance data,
Yeah.
there's been no flu. The US CDC has stopped reporting on flu because there's no flu. And the world abhors a vacuum. So there's been no flu. Once COVID is over, we're going to get a flu pandemic. And that's bad news, because the flu pandemics 1918, 1957, 1968, they were nasty.
Oh,
And if we reacted like this to COVID, which kind of spared the young, flu pandemics kill young people.
oh.
So it's the world really has to get its act together. We need to one of the good things is now we've got all these new vaccine technologies, so hopefully they can be adapted for flu. We've also got better testing, which is now every GP clinic can practically do a PCR test for COVID. So it's a matter of
Yes.
time before we can do a PCR test for flu as well. So unfortunately, the reality is that even though COVID may go away or may become something that we don't think about, flu is still out there, and who knows what the next respiratory virus is going to be.
But do you think that the flu has vanished only because we've all become very careful in terms of that being more airborne in terms of the transfer, right? Um,
Yes.
uh, we've been masked up, we've been more careful, so maybe it's not really happening because of that
Yeah,
reason.
so that's one theory, and in fact, I interviewed an Australian academic, and I
Right.
asked him, "Do you know that this?" I pointed out to him that this year, every week there are 20 or 30 fewer deaths from influenza and pneumonia than there have been in the last 5 years, and that's
Yes.
purely because there's no flu in Australia.
Yeah.
And I said, can you ethically go back to where it was if you are going to have 30 people more dying every week? And he said, well, he thinks it's the travel restrictions which stop the flu. Because flu, occurs in the winter in the north,
Yeah.
then it
Yeah.
moves down to the tropics, and then it occurs in the winter in the south, and then it moves back up to the northern hemisphere. So he thinks that by stopping travel that you've kind of blocked it off. So when travel reopens, the chances are flu will come back.
Right.
The other thing about flu is that we know flu exists in animals. Flu exists in birds, and pigs, and ducks. And so there's plenty of reservoirs for the flu. It's not like some obscure bat species in some cave in Yunnan.
Yeah.
You see, the
Right.
ducks and chickens are everywhere. You see, all over the world. So I think while it's true that flu may be down partly because of all the social distancing and the mask use and things like that, but it's waiting around the corner.
Wow. Now that's scary to say the least.
Yeah.
I think well the message of the hour is that we've got to just go practice what we do right now, continue to be cautious in the coming years, so that it's not that we end this current pandemic and we get ourselves into another situation because we've sort of ignored the other aspects. But just one last one, Professor, is that if somebody already has COVID, should he or she go ahead and be vaccinated, or doesn't need to be? Go
Yeah,
ahead.
so this is actually a very good question. And the current recommendation, interestingly enough, I've had a few of my patients, they have asked the Ministry of Health about this, and it's a changing scenario, so it might change. But one of my patients was told, since you had COVID just recently, why don't you let somebody else get the vaccine? because the chances are that at least for the next 3 to 6 months, you're
Won't
likely
get-
to be immune. So,
Right.
so my patient is very, altruistic, and he said, "Sure, I'll do that. I'll go to the back of the queue." But he still wants to get the free vaccine, though.
So there's no advice which says that now that you've got it already, forget it. There's no need for you to. I mean,
Yeah,
you can still go
the
ahead and
disease
do
is
it.
new, so we don't know how long. Like I said, my theory is it's going to last 17 years, but that has to be proven. So right now, Minister of Health is saying 3 to 6 months. The chances are you're likely to be protected.
Right. Perfect. Thank you so much, Professor Tambyah. I think you have been extremely patient despite having all these infectious diseases, the knowledge behind them, the experience in your mind. You're so calm. That itself says a lot about you. I mean, if I knew all that you know right now, I would be stressing myself out with, washing my hands every 2 minutes while talking to you as well. So, I see that. What's the secret of you remaining so calm all the time? Is that not?
I don't know. I have no idea. It's probably my parents.
And on one side you're an amazing professor, doctor with awards that I've seen the number of awards, the writings you've written, so many papers and whatnot. And on the other side, you practice politics. I cannot imagine. That these two are like totally contrast. How do you manage that?
Well, they're all part of the same thing, but I need to run. And thanks very much for that.
But thank you so much, Professor, for all your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, obviously, we did not have to distract to the other side, but that was one area that I wanted to bring out as well, is that apart from being who he is, and we've seen the last 30 minutes that we spoke to him, amazing in terms of what he knows about his work that he practices away from medicine. He's the chairman of the Singapore Democratic Party, and there's something that we just wanted to highlight as well. So very, very active across, very, very active in terms of his research, awards, the Singapore Science Mentorship Program Outstanding Mentor Award, the National University Singapore Annual Teaching Excellence Award, and whatnot. So totally into his profession and a lot more. That was Professor Tambyah, and I hope you guys got your answer on this show. Something that you've been debating, something that you've been writing to us about, whether or not to be inoculated, whether to go for the vaccine or not. What happens if I'm allergic? What happens if I'm already infected? What happens? Do I get it again or not? Well, then definitely, I hope your questions were answered this afternoon. On Radio Masti 24/7 and Masti AVI, this is Renuka saying thank you for watching and thank you for sending all your questions.
Make sure you add Musty to your lives. Download the app today and stay energized and connected on the go. Radio Musty 24/7 Live, Singapore's only Bollywood radio since 2009.